The dining room at my grandmother's house was warm in the way only decades of tradition could make it. The air smelled like butter and sage and roasted turkey skin, the long oak table already crowded with bowls, folded napkins, and the good china that only came out once a year. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, her white hair pinned neatly back, her hands folded in her lap as she surveyed the room with the same quiet authority she had always carried. Thanksgiving had always been her holiday, the one day when everyone showed up, no excuses, no drama because Grandma expected it. She leaned slightly forward in her chair and looked around, her eyes pausing at the empty place setting near the end of the table. Her brow furrowed just a little, not in anger, but in concern. "Where is she?" she asked gently. "She promised to bring the pie." For a split second no one answered. The clink of silverware stopped. A cousin cleared his throat. Then my mother smiled the practiced smile she used when she wanted something unpleasant to sound reasonable. "Oh, she didn't want to come," my mother said, waving her hand lightly as if brushing away a minor inconvenience. "She's out partying again. You know how she is." The words landed softly, almost casually, but they changed the temperature of the room. One of my aunts shook her head slowly. Lips pressed together. "Such a shame," she murmured. Another relative sighed as if this confirmed something they had always suspected. My grandmother did not speak right away. She looked down at the empty chair, then back up at my mother. "That's disappointing," she said quietly. "Families should be together on Thanksgiving." My mother nodded, her expression tinged with false regret. "We tried," she said. "You can't help someone who doesn't want to help herself." Around the table, heads nodded. The story settled into place, neat and complete. I was irresponsible. I was selfish. I had chosen fun over family. In that warm dining room with the candles lit and the turkey resting in the kitchen, my absence became a moral flaw, a character defect that explained everything. What none of them could see, what none of them were thinking about as they lifted their glasses and began to pass the rolls, was the reality unfolding at that exact same moment a few miles away. I was not out partying. I was not with friends. I was not anywhere loud or careless or free. I was on the cold concrete floor of our laundry room, my wrists pulled painfully behind my back, the plastic zip ties biting into my skin. The room had no windows. The only light came from a single bare bulb above the washing machine, casting harsh shadows on the shelves stacked with detergent and cleaning supplies. The air smelled faintly of bleach and damp fabric. My phone was gone. They had taken it the night before under the excuse of wanting to talk without distractions. The door was shut and I had heard the lock turn from the outside. I lay there listening, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. At first, I had told myself this was temporary. They had said it would be. "Just stay here for a bit," my father had told me earlier that morning. "We need you to calm down. We will be back soon." I had believed him because believing him was easier than accepting the alternative. But then I heard the sounds of them getting ready, the front door opening and closing, the muffled voices, the scrape of shoes against the entryway floor, the engine of the car starting. I strained to hear someone say my name, to hear footsteps coming back down the hallway, but instead I heard the garage door lift, then slam shut. The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. I lay there staring at the pipes running along the ceiling, the cold metal inches from my face, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. I tested the zip ties again, twisting my wrists, feeling the sharp sting as they dug deeper. They did not budge. Somewhere across town, my grandmother was being told that I had embarrassed the family, that I had chosen partying over pie noise, over tradition myself, over everyone else. Somewhere she was shaking her head in quiet disappointment, believing the story she had been given because it came from the people she trusted most. I wondered if she was thinking of me as she always did, as the reliable granddaughter who showed up early to help set the table, who washed dishes without being asked, who never missed a holiday, or if that image was already being replaced by the one my mother had painted with a single sentence. The weight of that thought pressed down on me harder than the zip ties. I tried to call out, my voice hoarse, but the walls swallowed the sound. I tried again, louder this time, until my throat burned, but no one answered. The house was empty. The silence was thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant ticking of a clock somewhere in the hallway. I did not know what time it was exactly, only that the morning had slipped away while I lay there counting my breaths, counting the seconds between my heartbeats. Eventually, the panic gave way to something colder, heavier. The realization settled slowly like a door closing in my mind. They had not just left me behind. They had removed me. They had created a version of me that could sit comfortably at my grandmother's table without my physical presence, a story that justified my absence and protected their image. As I lay there, the skin around my wrists already red and aching, I imagined the moment when my grandmother would bow her head for prayer, her voice steady as she gave thanks for family, for health, for togetherness. I imagined her chair scraping back as everyone sat down to eat the empty place at the table, filled not with concern, but with judgment. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor and closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream, because screaming would not change the fact that at 12:43 p.m., while my family told my grandmother I was embarrassing them, I was tied to a pipe and left alone. Before that Thanksgiving morning, before the zip ties and the locked door and the lie told so easily at my grandmother's table, I had a role in my family that everyone understood without ever needing to name it. I was 26 years old, and I was the reliable one. The one who answered the phone. The one who stayed calm when voices rose. The one who handled things because I could. I worked as a medical billing and compliance coordinator, a job most people barely noticed until something went wrong. I spent my days untangling denied claims, correcting coding errors, filing appeals, documenting timelines, and making sure systems followed the rules they pretended to respect. It was quiet work, precise work, the kind of work that required patience and attention to detail, and an ability to stay steady while other people panicked. My family liked to joke that my job made me boring. Too serious, too careful. But when insurance letters arrived that no one understood, they slid them across the kitchen counter to me. When medical bills came in with impossible numbers highlighted in red, they called my name. When deadlines loomed and paperwork piled up, they said the same thing every time. You are good at this. You know how to handle it. I lived with my parents because the rent in our area had jumped faster than my paycheck, and because staying made sense on paper. I helped manage household bills. I tracked due dates. I kept copies of policies and statements in labeled folders on my laptop. It was never framed as dependence. It was framed as teamwork. We are all helping each other, my mother liked to say. You are lucky to live here while you get on your feet. I nodded because arguing felt unnecessary and because on the surface nothing seemed wrong. I did not drink much. I did not go out late. I did not bring chaos into the house. I went to work, came home cooked when needed, cleaned when asked, and filled in the gaps everyone else overlooked. In family conversations, I was described as the easy one, the one who did not need much, the one who could be counted on. My grandmother trusted me in a way that felt old-fashioned and solid. She knew I would show up when I said I would. She knew I would keep my word. When she asked me to bring the pie that Thanksgiving, she did not hesitate or follow up. She simply assumed it would be done. That trust was something I had earned over years of quiet consistency. It was also the reason the lie hurt as deeply as it did. In my family, I was not the favorite or the loudest or the most admired. I was the one people leaned on without thinking about the weight they were placing. When something broke, I fixed it or figured out who could. When someone forgot a deadline, I remembered. When tension rose, I smoothed it over. I was praised for being mature, responsible, low maintenance. Those words sounded like compliments, but they came with expectations attached. I learned early that being dependable meant being flexible. It meant swallowing frustration and adjusting plans. It meant not pushing back too hard when my needs conflicted with everyone else's comfort. I told myself this was adulthood, that this was how families worked, that my role mattered even if it was invisible. There were moments when something felt off, small moments I dismissed because they did not fit the story I had of us. My mother reading my text messages over my shoulder and commenting on who I talked to. My father deciding when I should be home because he worried about how it looked. Conversations that ended with me apologizing even when I was not sure what I had done wrong. Each time I rationalized it away. They care. They worry. They want the best for me. I had been taught that gratitude meant compliance, and I was very good at being grateful. The truth was that my reliability made me useful, and my usefulness made it easy to forget my autonomy. Decisions about the household were made around me, not with me. Plans were adjusted without asking my opinion because it was assumed I would understand. When I did push back gently, carefully, the room shifted. Voices cooled. Expressions tightened. The message was subtle but clear. Do not make this difficult. You are better than that. Over time, I learned to measure my words, to choose silence over friction, to accept that my value in the family came from how smoothly things ran when I handled them. From the outside, we looked functional, respectable, church on Sundays, holidays together, a grandmother who believed she had raised a family that valued togetherness and respect. Inside, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and I occupied a place that required constant proving. I was trusted with responsibilities, but not with freedom. Trusted with money and documents, but not with my own choices. That Thanksgiving, when my grandmother asked where I was, my family did not hesitate to replace me with a story that suited them better. A story that preserved their image and explained my absence in a way that required no accountability from them. The reason it worked was because of who I had been in that family. The responsible one. The quiet one. The one who would never make a scene. The one they believed they could control without consequence. They thought my reliability would extend even into my absence. They thought I would stay silent. They were wrong. The first time they took my phone, it did not feel dramatic enough to call abuse. That is part of why it worked. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night after dinner, the kind of evening that fades from memory because nothing about it seems important at the time. I had come home later than usual because I stayed at work to finish an appeal that could not wait until morning. When I walked through the door, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her arms crossed, my father standing near the counter pretending to scroll through his own phone. "You are late," my mother said, not as an observation, but as an accusation. I explained calmly that I had stayed to fix a billing issue before a deadline. She shook her head as if that explanation missed the point entirely. "You did not answer your phone," she said. I told her it had been on silent while I worked. That was when my father stepped forward and held out his hand. "Give it to me," he said. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. When I realized he was not, the laugh died in my throat. "Why," I asked, already feeling the room shift. "Because you are getting disrespectful," my mother said. "You think you can come and go however you want and ignore us. That is not how this house works." I tried to reason with them, pointing out that I was an adult, that I paid my share, that staying late at work was not a crime. My voice stayed level, careful, the way it always did when I wanted to be taken seriously. That only seemed to make them more rigid. "You always think you know better," my father said. "Maybe you need a night without distractions to remember where you live." He took the phone from my hand and placed it face down on the counter behind him. "You can have it back in the morning." My mother added her tone, clipped but controlled. "We are just trying to help you reset." That phrase landed softly, wrapped in concern. "Trying to help you." I remember standing there, my hands suddenly empty, feeling foolish for being unsettled. It was just one night, I told myself. Families set rules. I went to my room and lay awake longer than usual, aware of how quiet the house felt, without the familiar weight of my phone beside me. The next morning, they handed it back without comment, as if nothing unusual had happened. I did not bring it up again. A few weeks later, it happened a second time. This time, it followed an argument about my plans for the weekend. I had mentioned I might meet a friend for coffee on Saturday. My mother frowned immediately. "You have been out a lot lately," she said, though that was not true. My father chimed in about responsibilities, about how appearances mattered, about how people talked. When I pushed back when I said coffee was hardly reckless, the mood darkened. "You are getting defensive," my mother said. "That tells me you know you are wrong." Before I could respond, my father reached for my phone again. "Just for the night," he said. "You need to calm down." I hesitated longer that time. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I could have refused. I could have made a scene. Instead, I handed it over because I did not want to escalate things, because I believed that cooperation would make it end faster. That night, they also locked my bedroom door from the outside. Not completely, just enough that the handle would not turn. When I noticed panic flared sharp and sudden, I knocked, keeping my voice low so as not to provoke them. My mother answered from the hallway, sounding tired rather than cruel. "Go to sleep," she said. "You are safe. You just need time to think." I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself this was not what it felt like, that this was discipline, not control, that if I just complied, things would return to normal. In the morning, the door was unlocked. My phone was returned. No one mentioned the lock. No one apologized. It was as if the night had never happened. That pattern repeated itself in small variations. A phone taken because I spoke too sharply. A door locked because I was emotional. Each incident was explained away as concern, as guidance, as something I brought on myself. They never raised their hands. They never left bruises. They did not need to. Control came in quieter forms. Control came wrapped in language about family and respect and protection. Over time, I learned to anticipate it. I learned which topics to avoid, which words would trigger tension, which silences were safer than honesty. I also learned something more dangerous. I learned that when I complied, the house stayed calm. When I resisted, consequences followed. By the time Thanksgiving approached, the idea of them taking my phone or limiting my movement no longer shocked me. It worried me, yes, but it did not feel impossible. It felt like an extension of rules that had already been tested and normalized. That is why when they told me to stay home that morning, when they said they needed me to cool off before joining everyone later, I did not immediately panic. I told myself it would pass. I told myself they would not go that far. I had been wrong before, and I would be wrong again. Long before that Thanksgiving. Long before the zip ties and the silence and the lie told with effortless confidence, I understood that my family valued image more than truth. It was not something they said outright. It was something woven into the fabric of daily life, a quiet doctrine enforced through glances, tone, and the unspoken threat of embarrassment. Appearances were everything in our house. What the neighbors thought mattered. What my grandmother believed mattered even more. The idea of looking like a respectable family, a united family, a God-honoring family, carried more weight than the actual well-being of the people inside the house. My mother had perfected the art of presenting our family as polished and stable. She volunteered at church, wore soft colors, and spoke in a calm voice that made people trust her immediately. She knew exactly how to tilt her head while listening, how to express concern without appearing intrusive, how to sound supportive while steering conversations toward the image she wanted others to have. My father played his role as well. He was the steady one, the provider, the man who nodded through conversations with an air of patient authority. He rarely raised his voice in public, and when he did privately, it was framed as guidance or frustration born out of love. To the outside world, we were fine. Better than fine, respectable. But inside, everything operated on a fragile system of unspoken rules designed to maintain that illusion. If someone upset the balance, if someone drew unwanted attention or created a crack in the presentation, the response was swift and quiet. Not violent, not explosive, but firm enough to remind us that image came first. I noticed this long before it applied to me. When my older cousins made mistakes, the stories my family told the extended relatives were lightly rewritten, softened, reframed. A failed semester became a difficult professor. A breakup became a mutual decision. A lost job became a temporary transition. Reputation came before accuracy. So when it eventually turned toward me, I recognized the pattern even if I resisted it at first. My mother liked to call it protecting the family legacy. She never defined what that legacy was, but the message was clear. Do not shame us. Do not draw attention. Do not give people something to talk about. And if you do, we will control the narrative before you have the chance. My grandmother, gentle and trusting, stood at the center of that narrative. She was the moral anchor of the family, the one everyone looked up to. Because she was well respected, her approval became currency. Her disappointment became a threat. I grew up understanding that making Grandma proud was the highest form of success. My mother understood that too, but she used it differently. She used Grandma's moral authority as a shield and a weapon. If she wanted to pressure someone, she invoked Grandma. If she wanted to silence me, she invoked Grandma. If she wanted to justify a decision, she framed it as protecting Grandma from stress or disappointment. It did not matter whether Grandma actually felt these things. It mattered that invoking her name worked. My role in this system was simple. I was the quiet one, the one who did not burden anyone, the one who handled responsibilities without creating complications. As long as I stayed in that box, I was praised. But the moment I stepped even slightly outside it, even in ways that were normal for someone my age, the tone shifted. If I came home late, it was framed as reckless. If I questioned a rule, it was framed as disrespect. If I disagreed even gently, it was framed as me creating unnecessary tension. And if I expressed any emotion stronger than mild annoyance, it was framed as instability. Everything became about image. Not reality, not well-being, image. That is why in the months leading up to Thanksgiving, small incidents were twisted into cautionary tales about my potential to embarrass the family. If I wore makeup that looked too bold, my mother frowned and said people might misunderstand what kind of person I was. If I laughed too loudly at a joke during a family gathering, my father pulled me aside afterward and said a young woman should be more composed. If I mentioned wanting to move out even casually, the room went silent, and my mother asked if I was trying to run away from responsibility. These moments accumulated slowly like dust settling in corners you do not notice until the light hits just right. Over time, I realized that my family did not see me as an adult with my own life. They saw me as a reflection of their reputation. My choices were never mine. They were extensions of their image. Even my job, one that required technical skill and meticulous accuracy, was framed as something they tolerated rather than respected. It was stable, quiet, unimpressive, convenient. It fit the narrative of me being responsible but not independent. And independence, in their view, was dangerous. Independence meant I might make decisions outside their control. Independence meant I might contradict the image they projected. Independence meant I might say something that made them look less perfect. In the weeks before Thanksgiving, I sensed the tension building. My grandmother had called me twice, asking sweetly if I was excited for the holiday, reminding me she could not wait to see me. My mother overheard one of those calls, and her expression tightened in a way that made my stomach twist. I knew that look. It was the look she wore when she feared I might say something she could not control. The night before Thanksgiving, when my parents took my phone again, they told themselves and me that it was about respect, that it was about order, that it was about helping me calm down. But beneath their words, I saw the truth. It was about image. It was about fear that I might show up at Grandma's house and tell someone something they did not want told. It was about containing me long enough to keep their story intact. They told themselves I was the problem. They told my grandmother I was irresponsible. They told the family I was choosing partying over tradition. And they told me through their actions that my safety, autonomy, and dignity were secondary to the way they wanted to be seen. That morning, when they locked the laundry room door and walked out of the house, they did not think of it as cruelty. They thought of it as preservation. They were not protecting me. They were protecting the image they valued more than my well-being. Thanksgiving morning began the way ordinary mornings often do, deceptively calm, with nothing loud or dramatic enough to signal the shift that was coming. I woke before my alarm, something about the quiet of the house unsettling in a way I could not name yet. The sun had barely risen, soft light slipping through the blinds and casting long lines across the carpet. For a few seconds I allowed myself to believe the day might follow the plan I had held in my mind. I would get ready. I would pick up the pie I had made the night before. I would drive to Grandma's house, greet her with a hug, and help set the table the way we always did. Normal, predictable, safe. But the stillness in the house that morning felt different, as if the air had been held too tightly. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed my parents' bedroom door opened the bed already made. They were awake early, which was unusual. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, but the usual clatter of breakfast was absent. I felt something tighten inside me. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, listening. My parents were standing near the counter, talking in low voices that stopped the moment they saw me. My father held a travel mug in his hand. My mother was already dressed, her coat draped over the back of a chair. They both looked at me with expressions that were too calm, too prepared. "Good you are up," my mother said, as if this morning were no different from any other. I nodded, trying to ease the tension building in my chest. I thought she might mention Grandma, mention the pie, mention the gathering we were supposed to attend. Instead, she exchanged a look with my father, then cleared her throat in that careful way she used when she was preparing to deliver a decision rather than start a conversation. "We think it is best if you stay home for a bit this morning," she said. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were already set. "You need some time to yourself." The words hit a familiar nerve, one tied to smaller incidents I had tried to forget. Time to yourself, time to calm down, time to think. They used phrases like that when they wanted compliance without argument. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "We need to help Grandma with some things before everyone arrives," my father said. "It will be crowded. It is better if you come later after things settle." I stared at him, feeling the disconnect between his words and his posture. His shoulders were too tense, his hand around the travel mug too firm. Something about the explanation felt rehearsed. I should have trusted my instincts, but part of me wanted to believe this version of the story. I wanted to believe they were simply disorganized or stressed or worried about logistics. It was easier than believing they were doing something intentional. My mother stepped closer, her voice softening in a way that sounded caring on the surface but carried a sharper undercurrent. "You have been overwhelmed lately," she said. "It is not good for you to jump into a big family gathering right away. You need a quiet morning. We will come back for you in a bit." She reached out and touched my arm lightly as if offering comfort, but the gesture only deepened my unease. I opened my mouth to respond, to push back gently, to explain that Grandma expected me, that I wanted to go early to help set up to be useful, but my father interrupted. "There is no need to argue," he said. "We have made the decision." His voice was firm, a tone I recognized from the nights when boundaries shifted without warning. I felt the floor tilt in the slightest way, a small warning that the situation was sliding towards something familiar, yet worse. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. "I will be fine at Grandma's," I said quietly. I promised her I would bring the pie. That was when my mother's expression tightened the way it did when she feared losing control of the narrative. Her voice lowered. "You are not going there right now. You are staying home. That is final." She motioned toward the hallway. "Go sit in the laundry room. You need some time to cool down." The words hit me like cold water. Laundry room, cool down. The same phrases used in smaller conflicts now expanded into something larger and far more deliberate. I felt a jolt of panic, but kept it hidden, choosing silence over confrontation, because I knew from experience that pushing back would escalate things faster. I walked toward the laundry room, slowly hoping they might stop me or reconsider. My footsteps felt heavy, my breath shallow. When I stepped inside, the room was dim and cold. I turned around to face them, hoping to reason with them one last time. "This is unnecessary," I said softly. "I am not upset. I just want to go to Grandma's." My father shook his head. "This is not up for discussion." Then, before I understood what was happening, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of zip ties. The sight of them froze me in place. My mother stepped behind me. "Just relax," she said in a flat voice. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." My father took my wrists and pulled them behind my back with a swiftness that suggested this was not spontaneous, but planned. The plastic tightened around my skin, sharp and unyielding. I gasped, not from pain, but from the shock of realizing that whatever line existed before had now been crossed completely. "Dad, please," I whispered, but my voice barely made it past my throat. My mother avoided eye contact as she pulled the laundry room door shut. She locked it from the outside. I heard the click, a sound that would replay in my mind long after that day. For a moment, I waited, thinking they might unlock it, thinking they might regret it, thinking they might say something through the door. Instead, I heard them gathering their things, moving through the house, their footsteps steady and unhurried. The front door opened, the garage door followed, the car engine started. They left. Not in anger, not in chaos, but with the calm certainty of people who believed they were doing something reasonable. That was the escalation. Not loud, not violent in the way people imagine violence, but unmistakably, undeniably intentional. And I was alone, tied, waiting for a morning they never planned to include me in. The moment the lock clicked, everything inside me shifted. It was a small sound, barely louder than a fingernail tapping a glass, but it carried the weight of something final, something irreversible. I had heard that lock turn before, but never with this steadiness, never with this certainty, never with the quiet intention of people who believed they had already justified what they were doing. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear any sign that they were still there, any hesitation, any second thoughts. There was nothing, only the soft shuffle of movement as they walked down the hallway, their footsteps light, unhurried, almost peaceful, as if they had placed a heavy object exactly where it belonged. I called out their names, not shouting just enough to test if they would answer. They did not. My heartbeat quickened, sending a pulse of warmth through my cold hands. I twisted my wrists, feeling the zip ties dig deeper into my skin. The plastic burned against the small bones, biting in with every movement. I tried to twist them enough to loosen the tension, but the more I moved, the tighter they seemed to pull. I stopped breathing through the sting. I heard my mother's voice faintly from the hallway, a calm murmur I could not fully make out, followed by my father responding in a low tone. Their voices carried no urgency, no regret, no doubt. They were simply preparing to leave. The sound of the front door opening filtered through the house. A burst of colder air rushed in before the door closed again. Then the garage door began to rise, its motor humming loudly, filling the silence with a mechanical groan that vibrated through the walls. For a moment, hope flickered in me, a tiny spark that whispered, maybe they will check on me one last time. Maybe they will remember I need to breathe. Maybe they will hear how quiet it is and realize the wrongness of what they are doing. But the garage door reached the top and stayed there, buzzing faintly. My father's footsteps crossed the concrete. The car doors opened. I listened harder, my entire body leaning toward the sound, as though I could pull them back with sheer will. The engine started. The garage door began to lower. As it slid shut, the last sliver of outside light disappeared, leaving the house sealed and silent. The moment the door touched the ground, the engine revved softly, and the car backed out of the driveway. I heard the tires crunch across the gravel. Then nothing. The silence pressed against my ears so heavily that for a moment I thought I had gone deaf. I sat with my back against the cold washer, trying to slow my breathing. My wrists tingled from the pressure. I tried again to loosen the zip ties twisting my arms, shifting my weight, pulling in shallow movements. The ties held tight. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved inward. The harsh bulb above me flickered once, then steadied its light, too bright for such a cramped space. The smell of detergent and dust mixed with the faint metallic scent of the pipes behind me. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. They told Grandma I was out partying. They told the family I was irresponsible. They told themselves they were protecting their image. And they left me here, tied to a pipe on a cold floor in a room no one ever entered unless clothes needed washing. The idea settled into me slowly, cold and heavy. They were not punishing me. They were removing me. I remembered the look my mother gave me that morning, the calm certainty in her eyes. She had made that decision long before the zip ties. She had planned to keep me away from Grandma, from the relatives, from any opportunity I might have to contradict the story she wanted them to believe. I thought of Grandma sitting at her long table, her hands folded neatly, her gaze drifting toward the door each time it opened. She would wonder where I was. She would trust the explanation given to her because she had no reason not to. That thought hurt more than the restraints. I shifted again, trying to find a position that eased the pressure on my shoulders. The concrete floor was cold enough to seep through my bones. My knees ached from being pressed against it. I tilted my head toward the door, listening for any sign of life, but the house was still, completely still. I whispered for help, not loudly, but enough to release the pressure in my chest. The walls absorbed it. I listened for neighbors' footsteps passing cars, anything that suggested the outside world existed beyond these walls. The silence confirmed what I already knew. I was alone, truly alone. The truth settled in a new way, sharper, crueler. They had left me here long enough that no one would expect me at Grandma's. They had crafted the explanation ahead of time. They had created a version of me that justified my absence. They did not need me at their table. They needed their story. I leaned my head back against the pipes, feeling the cold metal against my scalp. My throat tightened as the weight of it all pressed down. I wondered how long I would be kept here. Hours. Maybe longer. I wondered if they assumed I would sit quietly, if they believed I would not struggle, if they were confident no one would question their story. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not violently, but with the quiet precision of truth settling into place. They had not accidentally crossed a line. They had walked across it deliberately. The lock had clicked. The car had left. They had chosen this, and I was finally starting to understand what that meant. The lie traveled faster than any truth ever could, carried by the voices of people who believed their version of events was not just correct, but morally necessary. While I sat on the cold laundry room floor, wrists burning beneath the tight pull of the zip ties, the story of my supposed irresponsibility was already making its rounds at my grandmother's house. I did not hear the words directly, but I could imagine the scene with painful clarity, because I had lived variations of it my entire life. My grandmother's home on Thanksgiving was always full, warm, and loud in a way only a multi-generational gathering could be. The smell of turkey and sweet potatoes filled every corner, the murmur of overlapping conversations rising and falling beneath the steady hum of football on the living room TV. Someone would be laughing too loudly. Someone would be complaining about traffic. Someone would be opening the oven just a little too often. And in the center of it all sat my grandmother, the quiet gravity around which the entire family orbited. She would have been waiting for me, watching the door with gentle expectation. I could see her in my mind, smoothing the tablecloth, adjusting the salt and pepper shakers, her gaze drifting toward the entryway each time a new car pulled up outside. She would be wearing the soft rose-colored sweater she saved for holidays and the small pearl earrings she had worn every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. That was the image I held as I lay tied to the pipe, listening to the silence in the house that used to feel familiar but now felt foreign and hostile. My grandmother would ask the question eventually. She always did. Where is she? That was when the lie would slip effortlessly into the room, delivered with a practiced sigh from my mother. She did not want to come. She is out partying again. The words would land softly coated in feigned disappointment, masking the sharp intentions beneath. I could picture my aunt setting down a platter with a shake of her head. That girl needs to grow up. I could imagine a cousin raising an eyebrow, whispering something like, "Of course she is," or "She has always been unpredictable." The lie would ripple outward, reshaping me in their minds. I would no longer be the one who showed up early to help set the table. I would no longer be the one who washed dishes while everyone else drifted into the living room. I would no longer be the one who stayed late to help Grandma wrap leftovers. Instead, I would be the one who chose fun over family, irresponsibility over tradition, shame over duty. My mother's voice would be soft, reassuring, even sympathetic. "She is overwhelmed lately. We are giving her space. You know how she gets." And the family, wanting to believe the most convenient version of the truth, would nod. They always nodded. Meanwhile, back in the house, I was no longer sure I belonged to the minutes stretched thin. The light bulb flickered once, and I felt the panic rise like a tide before I forced myself to steady my breathing. I twisted my wrists again, trying to angle them in a way that might loosen the plastic. Pain shot up my arms. I rested. Tried again. The zip ties held. My mind looped between fear and humiliation. Fear because I did not know how long I would be trapped here. Humiliation because the people who had created the situation were simultaneously building a narrative to justify it. While I shifted on the floor, trying to relieve the pressure on my knees, the lie was gaining momentum in a house full of people who trusted the storytellers more than they trusted me. I imagined the conversation shifting back to football or recipes or minor family gossip, my absence becoming a footnote. I could almost hear my grandmother trying to defend me with gentle confusion. She promised me she would bring the pie. My mother would offer a sympathetic smile. We tried to talk to her mom. "She is just making choices we do not understand right now." That phrase had been used on others in the family before. It always worked. It created the illusion of concern while quietly placing fault on the person being discussed. and no one would question it because questioning it would require effort, discomfort, or contradicting the family's preferred narrative. That was the strength of a lie told in the right setting. It did not need proof. It just needed familiarity. Back in the laundry room, the coldness seeped deeper into my skin. My shoulders throbbed from their strained position. My mouth felt dry, my voice hoarse from earlier attempts to call out. I leaned my head back against the pipes and tried to steady myself, but the more I thought about the version of me being presented at Grandma's table, the harder it became to breathe evenly. I imagined a cousin quietly judging me, saying she has always been dramatic or she needs to figure herself out. I imagined an uncle making a joke about young people and priorities. I imagined my grandmother's small, disappointed sigh. That sigh hurt more than the restraints biting into my skin. Parallel realities played out in perfect contrast. In one reality, I was tied, trapped, forgotten. In the other, I was being spoken about as though I had chosen all of it. This split was the cruelty I could not have predicted but should have recognized. This was not just physical abandonment. This was moral abandonment. They had not only locked me away, they had rewritten me to justify it. That realization struck deeper than any bruises the zip ties might leave. In that room, shaking slightly from cold and fear, I understood something I had ignored for years. The lie was not accidental. It was not reactive. It was not a misunderstanding. It was strategic, and once spoken, it traveled without resistance, reshaping everything in its path. While I fought the ties around my wrists, the version of me my family preferred was already circulating through the warm air of my grandmother's home, settling comfortably in the minds of the people I had once believed would know me better. In one house, I was alone and hurting. In the other, I was irresponsible, careless, and absent by choice. The distance between the two was only a few miles, but the chasm felt immeasurable. And for the first time that day, a slow, burning clarity began to form in my chest, cutting through the fog of fear. If they could lie so easily, then the truth would have to fight harder. Shame arrived before the fear had even settled. It crept in quietly, threading itself through every thought as I sat on the cold laundry room floor, my wrists burning under the tight pull of the zip ties. The fear was immediate, visceral, a punch to the gut that left my breath thin and shaky. But the shame moved differently. It seeped in like water through cracks, slow at first, then all at once filling every space my fear did not already occupy. I kept imagining my grandmother's face, her soft, kind eyes searching the doorway, her confusion when I did not appear, her concern turning into disappointment when my mother told her that I was out partying, that I had chosen to be somewhere else instead of with her. That image hollowed me out more than anything happening inside that laundry room. I could almost hear the quiet sigh she would give the one she used whenever someone she loved made a decision she did not understand but tried to accept anyway. I felt my stomach twist painfully at the thought of her believing, even for a moment, that I had abandoned her, that I had dismissed her invitation, that I had turned my back on a tradition she cherished. The shame pressed harder than the zip ties, settling into my chest like a weight I could not shift. My wrists throbbed as I twisted them again, trying to find some angle that eased the pressure. The plastic refused to give. I winced and leaned my head forward, taking slow breaths through clenched teeth. I did not want to panic. Panic would drain what little energy I had, and instinct told me I would need that energy later. So I forced myself to focus on breathing on, counting on anything that kept my thoughts from spiraling too quickly. The concrete floor was cold enough to seep into my bones. My legs were already going numb from kneeling in the same position for too long. I shifted, pressing my shoulder against the washing machine to keep from tipping over. A dull ache settled into my lower back, spreading slowly until the discomfort became part of the background, blending into the exhaustion and fear. My throat felt tight, not just from fear, but from humiliation. They had not only trapped me physically, they had reshaped me into a version of myself that fit their narrative, a version that excused their absence, a version that justified their cruelty. I imagined the relatives sharing knowing looks at the dinner table, whispering that I had always been unreliable, or that I was going through a phase, or that I needed to be taught responsibility. I imagined my mother shaking her head with a carefully crafted mixture of sadness and frustration, painting herself as a patient mother who had tried everything. I imagined my father adding just enough silence to imply that I had disappointed them both. And all the while, I sat on the floor, tied like a threat, like a burden they needed to contain. Shame bloomed in my chest so intensely that for a moment I could not breathe. I tried to swallow it down, but the bitterness remained. I closed my eyes and told myself to stop imagining the scene at Grandma's house, but the images kept coming. My grandmother lifting her glass for the family prayer, my empty chair, my cousins rolling their eyes, my aunt whispering something judgmental behind her napkin, my grandmother looking away from my empty seat with quiet resignation. Shame pulled at me harder than fear ever could, but beneath it, something else slowly began to form. A thin strand of anger, fragile at first, but present. It flickered in the background, a faint warmth in the coldness around me. It did not replace the shame. It did not overwhelm the fear. It simply existed alongside them, waiting. Survival instincts began to kick in. The logical part of my mind, trained through years of compliance work and problem solving, tried to assess the situation. The room was small. The door was locked from the outside with a deadbolt. My wrists were bound tightly, limiting my ability to use leverage. No windows. No vents big enough to create opportunity. The walls were solid. My voice would not carry far, not in a neighborhood where houses were spaced apart and windows were closed against the November cold. All of that was true. But none of it meant giving up. I shifted again, twisting my body to relieve the tension in my shoulders. Every movement sent a jolt of pain down my arms, but I forced myself to stay focused. I needed to conserve my energy. I needed to keep myself steady. I needed to think like someone who intended to survive, not like someone waiting to be rescued. But inside that determination, the shame still pulsed. I hated that I cared so much about what they were saying. I hated that the lie bothered me as much as the restraints. I hated that I felt humiliated on two fronts at once. Even trapped, even scared, even struggling to breathe evenly. My mind kept returning to the same thought. They used me to preserve their image. They sacrificed me for their narrative, and I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. But beneath the shame, beneath the ache in my wrists, and the burning humiliation, something cold and sharp began to take shape. It was the early form of clarity. The first quiet warning that things were shifting inside me. I was no longer just trying to survive the moment. I was beginning to see the larger truth behind it. They did not tie me up because I lost control. They did not leave me behind because they were overwhelmed. They did not lie about me because they were confused. They did all of it because it made their lives easier, because my voice threatened their story, because I was no longer willing to shrink myself into the shape they preferred. That clarity was faint at first, but it cut through the shame like a whisper through fog. It reminded me that what they said about me did not make it true. It reminded me that their actions revealed more about them than about me. And it reminded me of something I had forgotten in the years of being the quiet one. My story was still mine to reclaim. The shame did not disappear. It lingered, heavy and persistent. But for the first time since they locked the door, I felt a shift in my breathing. A steadiness, a spark beneath the humiliation. I straightened my back slowly, ignoring the sting in my wrists. Survival was no longer just about making it through the next minute. It was about understanding what this moment meant. It was about seeing clearly what my family had shown me. If they were willing to lock me away to protect their image, then the truth once revealed would be far more powerful than the lie traveling around to that Thanksgiving table. And in that cold laundry room surrounded by silence and betrayal, I decided something quietly but firmly. I would survive this. And when the truth came out, it would not be whispered. It would be undeniable. While I sat on the cold floor, breathing through the ache in my wrists and the tightening ring of panic around my ribs, life continued outside the walls of that house in ways my parents had not anticipated. They believed the story would hold. They believed the silence inside the laundry room would stay contained. They believed no one would question their explanation because they themselves never questioned it. But there was one person they had underestimated, one voice in the family that did not accept easy answers. My grandmother. I did not know the exact moment she grew concerned. I could only imagine the way it unfolded, but later, when the pieces came together, the timeline made perfect sense. At some point that afternoon, after the potatoes were mashed and the rolls were set to rise, and the cousins had arrived with their usual noisy greetings, she must have looked toward the door again, waiting for me to appear. She would have asked quietly, perhaps in the middle of setting out silverware. Has anyone heard from her? Someone would have repeated the lie. She is out partying again. She said she is not coming. And my grandmother, who had known me since the moment I entered the world, would have felt the first small crack of doubt. She would not make a scene. She never did. She would have simply nodded, but her fingers would tremble slightly as she folded her napkin. She would return to the kitchen, checking the pie I was supposed to bring, looking at the space where it should have been. Later, someone offered her a chair, a glass of water, a distraction. But she did not let things go easily when they did not make sense. That was something my parents always forgot. My grandmother believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but she also believed in honesty. And she knew me too well to accept a story that did not match the granddaughter she raised. So she did what she had always done when she sensed something was wrong. She called me, more than once. The phone my parents had taken from me vibrated somewhere in the house far beyond my reach, each unanswered call deepening her concern. I did not hear the ringtone, but later I imagined it echoing faintly from another room while I sat tied to a pipe, unaware that her worry was already growing. When she could not reach me, she called the house phone. No answer. She asked my parents' siblings. They had not heard from me either. She tried again. And again. Meanwhile, I was shifting desperately for comfort, trying to relieve the burning in my shoulders, trying to stay conscious as the hours stretched. At one point, I leaned my head against the washing machine, too exhausted to hold myself upright. A thin line of panic pressed against my throat every time I pictured the daylight fading. I whispered for help once, twice, then stopped because the sound only bounced back at me. My grandmother tried once more. No reply. And that was the moment the lie began to unravel. Concern, when genuine, has a tone people cannot fake. When she approached my aunt and said something is wrong, her voice would have carried the weight of certainty. Someone suggested I had turned off my phone. Someone else suggested I needed space. But my grandmother shook her head. No, she said. She promised she would come, and she would not ignore my calls. That conviction made the room quiet. She stepped aside, away from the dinner preparations and polite chatter, and dialed a number no one expected her to use. Her neighbor, a retired EMT who lived 2 houses away from us, had known our family for decades. If something seemed off, he checked. If someone needed help, he responded. She asked him if he could knock on our door, just to make sure everything is fine. He agreed immediately. While I knelt on the cold floor, struggling to keep my breathing steady, a soft knock echoed through the house. I froze, lifting my head, unsure if I had imagined it. The knock came again, louder this time, but I could not answer. I could not move fast enough. The neighbor tried the doorbell. He called out once, twice, no response. He stepped back and looked at the house with the trained instinct of someone who had seen too many emergencies to ignore a bad feeling. That was when he called the police. He did not dramatize anything. He simply reported a welfare concern, a young woman not answering calls, a house that should not be empty, a grandmother worried enough to ask him to check. Back in the laundry room, I felt a faint vibration through the floorboards but did not understand what it meant. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on staying awake because my arms were numb now and my legs were trembling. I had no sense of time, only the slow drag of fear that deepened each time I pictured the house growing darker. Outside, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out. They knocked, firmly announced themselves, waited. No answer. My neighbor explained what he knew. They looked at each other. They made the decision. They entered. I did not hear the door open, but I heard footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, moving deeper into the house. Then one voice called out loudly, "Police? Is anyone inside?" The sound jolted through me like electricity. I tried to respond, but my voice cracked. The footsteps grew louder. A second call came. Police, if you can hear us, call out. This time I managed to sound hoarse, weak, but enough. Here, I am here. And at that exact moment, at a Thanksgiving table miles away, my grandmother must have felt something shift inside her chest, a quiet confirmation of what she already knew. Something was wrong, and she had been right not to believe the lie. The officers followed my voice to the laundry room. The doorknob rattled. The deadbolt resisted. One of them stepped back. A hard impact, then another. The door burst open, flooding the cramped space with hallway light. And that was how the truth finally began its way back. Not through confession, not through guilt, but because one elderly woman refused to let a lie explain away her granddaughter's silence. When the door finally gave way, the burst of light felt unreal, too bright and too sudden for the dim, airless space I had been trapped in. I blinked hard, my eyes struggling to adjust as the outlines of two figures moved toward me. Their footsteps were steady, purposeful, filled with the kind of urgency that comes only when people understand instinctively that something is very wrong. One officer knelt beside me immediately. The other scanned the room as if mapping out every possible threat, every detail that might explain the scene in front of them. I tried to lift my head, but the weight of exhaustion pressed down like a lead blanket. My voice came out as a thin rasp. I am here. Please. The closer officer leaned in, his face coming into focus. Late 30s, dark hair, eyes sharp, but gentle enough that I felt something inside me unclench for the first time that day. He spoke in a voice calm enough to steady the shaking in my breath. We've got you. You're safe now. The words hit me harder than I expected. Safe. I had not realized until that moment how deeply unsafe I had felt for so long. He assessed the zip ties, quickly touching them lightly to avoid making the burning worse. His brow tightened. Who did this to you? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He did not push. Instead, he signaled to the second officer. Zip tie cutter. Now. The sound of the tool being unsheathed was crisp, metallic, terrifying, and relieving all at once. The officer positioned it carefully under the plastic band, digging into my skin. This may pinch, he said. It did more than pinch. It felt like fire when the tension released a surge of blood, rushing back into my hands so quickly that pain shot up my arms in hot waves. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers twitching uncontrollably as sensation returned in violent pulses. The officer steadied my hands gently. You're all right. Keep breathing. It's just circulation coming back. I nodded, even though my vision blurred. The pain felt enormous, but beneath it was something else. Relief. Freedom. At exactly 1:12 p.m., the zip ties fell to the floor. A timestamp I would remember later, recorded in the officer's report, and burned into my mind with the clarity of a wound healing too slowly. I leaned forward instinctively, but my body, cramped from hours in the same position, buckled. The officer caught me under my arms, lowering me with careful precision so I would not hit the floor. Can you move your legs? He asked. I tried. A small shift, then another. Pins and needles stabbed up from my calves. I managed a weak, yes. Good. We're going to help you out of this room. The other officer returned with a blanket from his cruiser and draped it over my shoulders. Only then did I realize how cold I had been. My teeth began to chatter, a delayed reaction, my body trembling from the combination of shock and returning circulation. The officer shone a flashlight across the room, documenting what he saw. Deadbolt on the outside, no windows, zip ties on the ground, cleaning chemicals stacked high enough to block airflow. He exchanged a look with his partner. That look was not casual. It carried recognition, anger, certainty. The younger officer knelt to my level and spoke with a clarity that cut through my haze. Miss, this is domestic abuse. You understand that, right? I felt something in my throat tighten, as if words were physically trapped there, unable to rise. He did not push me to speak. He simply continued. We're calling EMS to check you out, and we'll need to take photos for the case file. I nodded barely. The second officer moved gently behind me, lifting my hair away from my neck to check for injuries. His voice softened. Are you hurt anywhere besides your wrists? I swallowed, feeling my body tremble again. Just sore. Dizzy. He nodded. That's normal. You've been in one position a long time. We'll help you stand when you're ready. My wrists were throbbing now, angry red bands wrapping around them like fresh burns. The officer lifted my left arm slightly. I winced. Sorry, he murmured, but we need to document these. He got out his phone, took close-up photos, each one time-stamped automatically through their evidence app. Wrists, the indentation on my forearm, the marks on my upper arms where someone had grabbed me earlier. Then he photographed the deadbolt, the floor, the zip ties. Nothing staged. Everything factual. Meanwhile, the sound of radio chatter filled the room as the younger officer stepped into the hallway to report the situation. His voice was steady but edged with disbelief. Female victim restrained with zip ties and locked in a utility room. Signs of coercive control. No suspects on site. Requesting EMS and supervisor. When he stepped back into the room, he crouched down beside me again. Do you know who did this? The truth was simple, sharp, and heavy. Yes, my parents. The officers exchanged another look, and something shifted in their posture. A seriousness deeper than procedure. A kind of resolve. The older one asked quietly, Are they coming back today? I shook my head. They went to my grandmother's for Thanksgiving. He blinked hard, once absorbing that. They left you like this to go to dinner. Yes. The disgust was small, but visible in the tightening of his jaw. EMS arrived minutes later, flooding the house with new voices, new footsteps, new hands checking my pulse, my breathing, my injuries. They lifted me carefully to stand. My legs buckled the moment weight pressed through them. The paramedic steadied me. Easy. Your circulation's been restricted. Just go slow. They took my vitals, recorded my oxygen levels, examined my wrists, asked whether I wanted to go to the hospital. I hesitated only a moment before shaking my head. I did not want to be taken somewhere unfamiliar. I did not want to be away from the officers who had freed me. The paramedic nodded, respectful. We'll stay until you're stable and able to walk. The younger officer stepped forward again. We're opening a case? You won't need to confront anyone alone. I nodded once more, my body shivering under the blanket. I looked at the clock on the wall, its numbers slightly blurred. The minute hand ticked forward. 1:15 p.m. The moment marked something more than time. It marked a line. Before. After. At 1:12 p.m., the zip ties were cut. At 1:12 p.m., the truth officially began. At 1:12 p.m., whatever my family had claimed about me at Thanksgiving started unraveling. Not because I fought them, not because I convinced someone, but because facts once documented speak louder than lies ever can. The officers had barely finished documenting the laundry room before I felt the shift inside myself, subtle at first, then unmistakably clear. Something hardened, sharpened, focused. Survival had carried me through the hours on the floor. Shame had nearly drowned me. Fear had wrapped itself around my ribs like wire. But now, as the blanket warmed my shoulders and the officers moved with professional precision through the hallway, a new instinct rose to the surface. Evidence, documentation, facts preserved so they could not be twisted later. It was not a dramatic revelation. It was muscle memory. This was what I did every day at work, sorting through compliance cases, tracking claims, building timelines, proving truth with paper and timestamps. Except now the case was me, and I understood instantly that if I did not gather everything now while the scene was still raw, my family would find a way to explain it away. They always had explanations. She misunderstood. She overreacted. She is emotional. They would twist my absence at Thanksgiving into proof that I was unstable, rather than proof that they had locked me away. Lies spread fast. Evidence lasts. So I steadied myself on the dryer as feeling returned to my legs in painful bursts. The younger officer noticed. Do you need to sit? I shook my head. Something steadier than fear was moving through me now. I need to take pictures. He paused, studying me for a moment, assessing whether this was shock-talking or something else. When he nodded, there was respect in the gesture. If you are able, yes, that would help your case. He handed me his flashlight so I could angle it without straining my wrists too much. My hands trembled from the returning circulation, but the act of documenting anchored me. I photographed my wrists first, the deep red grooves etched into my skin like rings from a chain. I zoomed in, turned my hands, captured every angle. Then the door. The deadbolt installed on the outside, not the inside. The chipped wood around the frame where the officers had forced it open. The narrow space, the pile of detergent bottles blocking airflow, the towel on the floor I had knelt on until my knees went numb. Every detail mattered. Every detail was a piece of a larger truth they could not control. The older officer stepped aside so I could document the spot where the zip ties had fallen. He even pointed out a fragment of broken plastic I had not noticed. "Good," he murmured, "keep those. They can be logged later." I bent carefully, slipping the fragments into an evidence bag he offered my fingers, stiff but functional. The officers exchanged glances again, this time with a different kind of awareness. They had likely seen victims collapse or freeze or become overwhelmed. But I was doing something different. I was building a spine, a backbone of facts, a structure strong enough to hold up in court or under questioning or against whatever story my parents were already telling over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. Once we finished the laundry room, the younger officer asked gently, "Is there anything else in the house you think we should see?" I knew exactly where to go. My room. The place they always entered without knocking, always rearranged under the guise of cleaning or helping, always monitored with subtle comments about where my things should be. I walked slowly, still unsteady, the blanket trailing behind me like a second skin. In my room, nothing looked violent at first glance. That was the insidious part. Abuse did not always look like a broken lamp or shattered glass. Sometimes it looked like control disguised as order. I photographed the empty nightstand drawer where my phone had been placed before it was taken. I zoomed in on the charging cord still plugged into the wall, hanging loose. Then I opened the text thread on my backup device, the one I had used earlier that week when my main phone lagged. I scrolled until I found the last message my mother had sent the night before. "You are not going anywhere tomorrow. You need to calm down." I screenshotted it, capturing the timestamp. Then another message from my father earlier in the week. "You need to think about how your behavior affects this family." Screenshotted. I moved through the room, photographing everything I knew could help establish a pattern. The door frame, where the lock had been added months earlier, painted to match the trim so no one would question why it existed. The pile of folded clothes they had demanded I wash before going out last weekend as a condition for keeping my phone. My laptop open on my desk where I had researched apartments last month before my mother had taken the computer, claiming she needed to pay bills. I took photos of my search history. The older officer watched with a thoughtful expression. "You are very organized." I exhaled the smallest hint of bitter humor pushing through the exhaustion. "Compliance work." He nodded once. "That background is going to help you." EMS cleared me moments later, confirming I did not need immediate hospitalization, but urging me to ice my wrists and hydrate. The younger officer handed me a card. "This has your case number. Keep it with you. We will file for a temporary protective order if you want one." I did not hesitate. I want it. Good. It usually takes about 7 days for approval, but given the circumstances, it may be quicker. 7 days. A week. I could almost feel the calendar shifting in front of me, the next steps assembling themselves with mechanical precision. Evidence. Documentation. Statements. Protective order. More evidence. More truth. More unraveling. I walked back through the hallway with the officers, the blanket still wrapped around me. I felt strangely taller despite the exhaustion, as though something in my spine had finally reclaimed its shape after years of bending. Before leaving, the younger officer asked gently, "Do you have anyone safe to stay with tonight?" I nodded. "My grandmother." He nodded back. "Good. She cares about you." "Yes," I whispered, feeling my throat tighten. "She does." When I stepped outside into the afternoon air, the cold hit my face like a cleansing shock. November light filtered through the bare trees, sharp and honest. The officers escorted me to their patrol car, not because I needed physical help, but because the procedure mattered. The documentation mattered. Everything mattered now. In the passenger seat, holding the case number in my lap, I felt the full weight of what had happened. But I also felt something else rising slow and deliberate and steady. When lies travel fast, evidence travels far. And the spine of my story was no longer something my family could bend. It was mine, and it was solid. My grandmother's house had always been a place where noise layered itself into something warm. The clatter of serving spoons, the hum of distant conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from cousins who thought they were being discreet. Even when silence fell, it fell softly cushioned by history and ritual, and the sense that everyone present understood the meaning of belonging. But when the patrol car pulled into her driveway that evening, the quiet inside her house shifted. It was no longer the silence of people praying before a meal or passing dishes across the table. It was the kind of silence that arrives when truth walks in unexpected and uncompromising. The officers insisted on escorting me to the door, even though I told them I could walk alone. My wrists were wrapped in sterile gauze, the red marks still visible beneath the thin padding. My steps were steady but slow, the stiffness in my legs reminding me how long I had been trapped in one position. As we approached the porch, I could hear the faint clatter of dishes being cleared away. Thanksgiving dinner had already ended. The conversations were softer now, the kind that follow a meal when people lean back in their chairs and talk about inconsequential things to avoid heavier subjects. My grandmother's front door opened before I reached it. She stood there with one hand braced on the frame, her eyes widening as they landed on me. Her gaze traveled from my face to the blanket still draped around my shoulders to the bandages on my wrists. I watched her expression change in a slow, devastating sequence. Relief, confusion, recognition. Then, something sharper than anger, something older, something like betrayal. "Honey," she whispered, stepping forward to hold my face gently between her hands. "What happened to you?" My throat tightened instantly. Before I could answer, the younger officer spoke. "Ma'am, we found her restrained and locked inside a room at her parents' residence. We're gathering statements, but she is safe now." Safe. The word punctured whatever composure my grandmother had left. She blinked rapidly, her hands trembling as they hovered near my shoulders, unsure whether to touch the blanket or pull me fully into her arms. Behind her, relatives began drifting toward the entrance drawn by curiosity and alarm. My mother appeared first, pushing past two cousins with a bright, brittle smile she had perfected over years of managing appearances. "There you are," she said too quickly. "We were worried sick." I felt a cold rush move through me. The officers did too. Their posture changed subtly, leaning into alertness. My father stepped forward next, his expression a mix of irritation and confusion, like someone arriving late to a conversation they thought they controlled. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "We need to speak privately." My grandmother turned toward him slowly, as if rotating her entire body required effort. She held up one hand, palm out. "Do not speak." Her voice had the steadiness of a judge delivering a verdict. My father froze. My mother opened her mouth again, ready to spin another story, but my grandmother's hand rose higher. Not one word. A hush swept through the room. Chairs scraped as people stood. The warmth of post-dinner laziness evaporated, replaced by a tension so sharp it felt like a physical presence. My grandmother looked back at me, her eyes full of something I had not seen since childhood heartbreaks when she held me and whispered that some truths could shatter you but still set you free. She traced the edge of the bandage on my wrist with a shaking fingertip. "Who did this?" I swallowed hard. "Mom. Dad." The words left me with no dramatic flourish. Just quiet honesty, but the reaction was immediate. Gasps around the room. Someone muttered a curse. Someone else whispered, "I knew something was wrong." My mother's face turned pale, her composure fracturing. "Now, wait just a minute," she began, but the younger officer spoke before she could continue. "Ma'am, we have already documented the restraints, the deadbolt on the outside of the room, and the victim's statement. This is a police matter. Police matter." The phrase landed like a hammer. My grandmother straightened her shoulders, squaring despite her age. She looked at the two officers, then back at my parents, then back at me. "Bring her inside," she said. "She does not need to be on the porch for this." The older officer glanced at me. "Is that all right?" I nodded. My grandmother reached for my arm, gently guiding me into the living room where the fire still crackled from earlier. She settled me into her favorite chair, the one reserved for guests she wanted to protect or console. She stood beside me, not sitting, not resting, simply standing like a sentinel. My parents remained near the doorway, isolated by the collective weight of the room turning against them. My grandmother finally spoke, her voice low but unmistakably firm. "Tell me exactly what happened," I told her. Not every detail, not the parts too raw to say aloud yet, but enough. The zip ties, the locked door, the cold floor, the silence. The lie they told her at the Thanksgiving table just hours earlier. With each sentence, I watched the light in her eyes change. Not dim. Harden. Not fade. Focus. When I finished, she inhaled slowly as though steadying herself before delivering the words she knew must be said. She turned to face my mother first. "You told me she was out partying." Her voice did not tremble. "You used my name to cover what you had done." My mother's lips moved soundlessly before she forced out, "Mom, you do not understand. We were trying to calm her down. She needed time. She has been dramatic lately." My grandmother raised her chin. "You will stop now." My father attempted to step forward. "This is being blown out of proportion. We were disciplining her." My grandmother's eyes narrowed, sharp as winter glass. "You restrained her and left her alone. People discipline dogs better than that." The room fell silent again. The fire cracked. The officers watched without interfering, knowing instinctively this was not a moment for them to interrupt. My grandmother looked slowly between both of my parents. Then she spoke the sentence that would define that night, the sentence that would echo through every legal and emotional consequence that followed. "You will not use my name to shame her again." The words did not need to be louder. They were enough as they were spoken with the controlled fury of someone whose entire understanding of her family had just been rewritten. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but no one rushed to comfort her. My father's face flushed a combination of anger and humiliation, but no one looked away. My grandmother stepped closer to them, her voice cut from steel. "You left her tied to a pipe so that you could eat dinner and gossip about the child you abandoned. And you lied to me. You lied to all of us. All." My mother tried once more, her voice cracking. "We did not mean for it to go that far." My grandmother's reply was swift. "It went exactly as far as you allowed it to. And now you will face what comes next." She turned back to me, placing a hand gently over mine. "You are coming home with me tonight." The officers nodded in agreement. My mother inhaled sharply as if ready to protest, but my grandmother's glare stopped her before a single word emerged. "This is not your decision anymore," she said. "You forfeited that when you walked out the door and left your child in a locked room." The room stayed frozen, suspended in a moment of moral clarity that no one dared disturb. For the first time that day, the shame that had wrapped itself around my ribs loosened. Not because everything was fixed, not because justice had fully arrived, but because someone who mattered, someone who had weight in this family, had looked at the truth without blinking and spoken on my behalf, not softly, not subtly, but with a finality that left no room for revision. "You will not use my name to shame her again." In that moment, for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a problem, not as an unstable exaggeration, not as a story someone else controlled, but as myself. And for the first time since the lock clicked behind me hours earlier, I felt the beginning of something like peace. Consequences do not always arrive loudly. Sometimes they show up in quiet paperwork, in phone calls made early in the morning, in the shifting eyes of people who once believed they controlled the narrative. After that night at my grandmother's house, everything that followed moved with a steady inevitability, as if once the truth had finally been spoken aloud, the rest of the world simply aligned itself to acknowledge it. My grandmother insisted I sleep in her guest room, the one with the quilt she had sewn before I was born. She sat beside me until I fell asleep, her hand resting lightly over mine. Every time I opened my eyes that night, she was still there awake, watching the door, the way someone sits guard over a hospital bed. In the morning, the house smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. It should have felt comforting, but instead, my stomach tightened with a new kind of anxiety. I knew what waited for me outside this small bubble of safety. The officers had said they would be in contact. The protective order paperwork was already underway. The truth was no longer confined to whispers in living rooms. It had entered the legal system. My family could no longer hide behind their versions. Around 9, the younger officer called. The temporary protective order would likely be approved within days. They had already flagged my parents' address. For 48 hours, they were not allowed to come near me. For 7 days, no contact at all. After that, a court hearing. My grandmother listened as I explained everything. Her face tightened with every detail, her hands clenched slightly at her sides, as if resisting the urge to act on instincts older and fiercer than time. "You will not be going back there," she said again, her voice unwavering. "You have a home here for as long as you need." She meant it, and knowing she meant it changed the gravity of everything that came next. The family fallout began almost immediately. By noon, cousins were calling my grandmother asking if the rumors were true. Some were whispering their shock. Others confessed they had sensed something was wrong for years, but never understood the depth of it. A few admitted they believed the story about me partying until they heard the police report, and their voices carried a guilt that did not belong to me, but settled heavily between their sentences. My mother tried calling my grandmother repeatedly, but every call went unanswered. When she switched to texting, the messages grew increasingly frantic. "This is blown out of proportion. We were trying to discipline her. She has been unstable. She is lying." My grandmother read each message with a flat expression before setting the phone down as if touching something contaminated. "She will not speak to you until the court has finished its work," she said. "And maybe not after." The silence between them after that felt like the slow collapse of something that had been cracked long before I ever understood it. But the consequences extended beyond private relationships. 2 days later, a detective followed up with me. He requested additional photos, timestamps, the text messages I had saved my notes from the day after. I compiled everything with the same precision I used in my compliance job. The evidence looked even harsher when arranged chronologically. The first phone seizure, the second, the added lock, the escalation, the threats disguised as parental concern, and then Thanksgiving, the zip ties, the abandoned house, the welfare check, the forced entry, the photos. The detective exhaled slowly as he read. "This is clear coercive control and unlawful restraint. Charges are possible." I nodded, not out of vengeance, but out of acknowledgement. This was no longer only emotional, it was legal, and when people crossed from one realm into the other, consequences were no longer optional. Meanwhile, my parents' world began to unravel. The church community they relied on for validation whispered about the police car that had arrived at their house. Neighbors asked questions. My mother stopped attending church events. My father avoided the driveway. Their social circle built on carefully curated image began to fracture. Because this time, the truth was not a rumor. It had a case number, a welfare report, a protective order, and the backing of law enforcement who had documented every inch of the room they had locked me inside. But consequences were not just legal or social, they seeped into the emotional fabric of the family. One evening, my aunt visited my grandmother's house. She stood in the doorway, eyes red, voice trembling as she admitted that she had believed the lie. "I thought you really didn't want to come," she said. "I thought you had changed." Hearing her say that stung, but only briefly. Then the regret in her voice softened the edges. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should have asked you myself." Other relatives reached out in the days that followed. Some apologized. Some offered help. Some confessed they did not know what to say, but wanted me to know they believed me now. And there were a few, predictably, who kept their distance, clinging to the belief that parents could not possibly do something so cruel. Those were the voices I released from my life without hesitation. Meanwhile, the protective order was approved faster than expected. A judge signed it after reviewing the initial police report. 7 days later, I sat in a small courtroom with white walls and a clock that ticked a little too loudly. My grandmother sat beside me. My parents sat across the aisle. When the judge entered, the energy of the room condensed into something tight and unyielding. My father tried to speak first, insisting they had acted reasonably, that they had been overwhelmed, that the situation had been misinterpreted. My mother chimed in with her well-practiced tone of distress, insisting she had only wanted to keep the peace. The judge did not entertain long explanations. He had the photos, he had the timestamps, he had the welfare report, he had the officer's statement, he had the evidence spine I had spent days constructing. He flipped through the binder page after page, his expression never changing. When he looked up, his voice was calm, almost cold. The court sees no indication that the petitioner exaggerated the events. In fact, the documentation is consistent with unlawful restraint and coercive control. My mother inhaled sharply. My father's face reddened. The judge continued. A full protective order is granted for 6 months. Additionally, the court recommends that the district attorney review this case for possible criminal charges. The sound that escaped my mother then was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My father clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the judge's bench. I sat still, not triumphant, not vindictive, just steady. The truth was not dramatic, it was factual, and it was enough. After the hearing, as my grandmother guided me out of the building, she said nothing. She simply squeezed my hand. The deeper consequences revealed themselves in quieter moments. My parents' absence from family gatherings, their sudden disinterest in community events, the way my mother's friends stopped visiting, the awkwardness when my father tried to explain things to colleagues without admitting the truth. Their image, once curated with such precision, now fractured under the weight of reality, and I did not have to lift a single finger to make that happen. The truth did the work. The documentation held. The lie collapsed. In the weeks that followed, I slowly built a life outside of their reach. A new phone, new passwords, new routines, therapy appointments, support from relatives who had seen the truth for themselves, and my grandmother who insisted every week that she had only done what any decent person would do. But I knew better. Not everyone would have listened to their instincts. Not everyone would have questioned the convenient story. Not everyone would have made that call. The consequences for my parents were not explosive. They unfolded like a long overdue accounting. But they were real, and they were deserved. And as the weeks passed, one quiet fact became clearer than anything else. I had lost a family I never truly belonged to. But I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom, and the unwavering certainty that the truth once spoken could never be shoved back into silence again. Peace did not arrive with fireworks or some grand declaration. It came quietly like the soft settling of dust after a storm so gradual that I did not recognize it at first. In the weeks following the court hearing, my life shifted into something unfamiliar but steady. For the first time in years, mornings belonged to me. I woke not to tension in the hallway or the pressure of someone waiting to criticize the sound of my footsteps, but to the gentle hum of my grandmother's old heating system and the smell of her brewing coffee drifting down the hall. I began to reclaim small routines that had once been swallowed by family obligation. I walked before sunrise, the cold air of late November sharpening my senses and reminding me that breath could be full and unbroken. I cooked simple meals for myself without worrying who would accuse me of wasting groceries or leaving something out of place. I returned to work with a certain groundedness I had never known, able to focus without texts demanding I fix bills, resolve insurance issues, or cover for someone else's forgotten responsibility. My coworkers noticed before I did. "You seem lighter," one of them said. I did not know how to respond because I had not yet admitted it to myself. But they were right. The protective order created a boundary that was more than legal. It reshaped my sense of space of ownership over my own existence. For years, my family had dismissed my needs, convinced themselves that control was care, that fear was discipline, that silence was obedience. Now, for the first time, the law opposed them instead of me. My grandmother often told me that peace begins with permission to breathe. I understood that now. When December came, we decorated her living room together. She brought out boxes of ornaments she had collected over decades. Some were delicate glass from Germany. Some were paper ornaments my father had made as a child. She held each one as if deciding whether its history still deserved space. When she found the mug-shaped ornament with my name painted in glitter across the front, she smiled and handed it to me. "This one goes near the top where I can always see it," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, no need to reference what had happened, just love, just clarity. She placed her hand briefly on my cheek, and in that moment, something inside me softened. Not because the wound had healed, but because I realized it no longer needed to bleed in order to be acknowledged. Healing like peace is quiet. A few days before Christmas, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Charges were being reviewed. No guarantees yet, but the detective's notes were detailed, and the photographic evidence showed not only the physical restraints, but also the environmental conditions of the room they locked me in. The letter asked if I wanted to submit a victim impact statement. My grandmother watched me read it at the kitchen table. She did not tell me what to do. She simply said, "Whatever you choose, it will be right." That night, I sat with the blank form in front of me. Part of me wanted to let it go to avoid the exhaustion of another round of courts and paperwork and hearings. Another part of me, the part that remembered the lock clicking and the cold pipe against my back, knew that accountability was not only for me. It was for the next moment they might decide that control justified cruelty. So I wrote, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with honesty. I described the fear that settled into my bones. I described the shame forced on me by lies told in my absence. I described the numbness that came when I realized they had left for Thanksgiving dinner after binding my wrists and the clarity that swept through me when the officers cut me free. I wrote about survival. I wrote about truth. And when I finished, I felt no trembling, no doubt. Just completion. January passed quietly. The holiday decorations came down. Snow arrived and softened the world outside. One morning, while shoveling the walkway, my grandmother slipped slightly on a patch of ice. I reached out quickly to steady her. She laughed, saying age was catching up, but she still had some fight left in her. I smiled because I knew that fight was what saved me. In her, I found the thing my family had always tried to erase, a mirror of strength, a belief that truth was worth protecting. In February, the DA's office called again. The case was moving forward. My mother had attempted to argue that the restraints were a misunderstanding. My father insisted I had consented, but the officer's testimony contradicted them. The timestamps on the photos proved they were gone for hours. The lock could not be opened from the inside. Their lies dissolved under the simplest scrutiny. The detective told me my calm explanation helped them understand the full scope of coercive control. Most victims, he said, never report the first time something like this happens. You did. Not at the beginning, I replied softly. But when I could, I did. And that had to be enough. The news did not devastate me. It did not thrill me either. It simply felt like one more step on a long road out of darkness. My grandmother hosted a small dinner to celebrate the first hints of spring. Pink tulips sat on the table. Soft music played from the radio. Partway through the meal, she reached for my hand. You know, she said, you do not owe the world a performance of your healing. Just live. Just be. Her words echoed in my mind for days. So I began to build a life not shaped by trauma, but by choice. I found a small apartment 2 towns over, close enough to my grandmother, far enough from the past. The first night there, I sat alone on the floor with takeout containers and a single lamp lighting the room. It should have felt lonely, but instead it felt like the beginning of something I had not dared imagine. Independence without fear, freedom without consequence, silence without punishment. I got a new bed, new sheets, soft yellow curtains that let in morning light, a bookshelf for the novels I had saved over the years but never had time to read, a plant I wasn't sure I would keep alive but wanted to try. Every piece was chosen. Nothing was inherited out of obligation or accepted out of guilt. As the weeks passed, I created a routine. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday afternoons walking trails near the river, evenings where I cooked without rushing, nights where I slept through until dawn. And slowly, the version of me that had been shaped by fear began to dissolve. Not erased, not forgotten, but integrated into something stronger, something whole. My grandmother visited often. She loved the little apartment. She would sit in my new armchair sipping tea content just to exist in the quiet with me. You know, she said one afternoon, your life looks peaceful on you. I smiled. I felt it too. We did not discuss the ongoing investigation unless needed. We did not discuss the family unless necessary. My parents had attempted once to send a message through a cousin asking if I planned to drop the charges. The cousin apologized when relaying it. "They should not have asked you that," she said. I agreed silently. I gave no answer. Some questions do not deserve responses. Some doors must remain closed. The hearing date was set for late spring. I prepared without dread. Whatever happened, I was no longer that girl locked in the laundry room. I had evidence. I had truth. I had boundaries. And I had peace. Even if the legal outcome shifted my life no longer revolved around their choices. The night before the hearing, I stood by my apartment window watching rain fall on the street below. A soft glow from streetlights illuminated the drops. I wrapped my sweater around myself, letting the quiet settle in. They said I was out partying. They told that lie because it was easier than telling the truth, easier than admitting what they did. But lies collapse under documentation. Shame dissolves under sunlight, and fear weakens under the weight of clarity. I turned off the lamp and moved toward my bedroom, the air cool and clean. Tomorrow would come as days always do, but I would walk into it steady, grounded, untouched by the chaos of their choices. Because peace once chosen is not something anyone can take away again. And in the soft quiet of that evening, I understood the truest closure I had ever known. They said I was out partying. The truth was documented. And I survived. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you, because stories like these are never just entertainment for many people. They are memories. They are reflections. They are reminders of moments we survived quietly while the world around us insisted everything was fine. And if any part of this story echoed something you have seen or felt or lived through, I want you to know this clearly: you are not alone, you are not invisible, and you are not overreacting. Family can be our greatest source of love, but when loyalty is used as a leash and obedience is treated as virtue, sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply tell the truth. Some of you watching have been the protectors in your family, the ones who kept the peace, the ones who smoothed every conflict until there was nothing left of yourselves to smooth. Some of you have been the quiet survivors, the ones who endured the raised voices behind closed doors, the manipulations nobody believed, the kind of control that leaves no bruises but leaves marks anyway. And some of you have been the witnesses who saw something was wrong long before anyone said it aloud. Wherever you are in that story, I want you to pause for one moment and ask yourself the question that changed everything for me. What would your life look like if you no longer lived under someone else's version of who you are supposed to be? Not who they say you are, not who they need you to be, but who you truly are when no one is controlling the narrative. If you felt a spark of recognition while listening, if you whispered to yourself that this is too familiar, then I invite you to take one small step today toward your own clarity. Maybe it is writing something down. Maybe it is setting a boundary. Maybe it is simply admitting to yourself that what happened was real. Healing does not begin with grand gestures. It begins with acknowledgement, with that quiet moment when you finally say, "This is not normal and I deserve better." And if this story moved you, I hope you will join this community by subscribing, because here we hold space for the truth. We talk about dignity. We talk about accountability. We talk about the strength it takes to choose peace when chaos was all you ever knew. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and how this story resonated with you. Your voice may be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you have lived through something similar, only share what feels safe, but know that your experience matters here. The more we speak, the less power silence has. The more we tell the truth, the less room there is for shame. And the more we stand together, the more we remind each other that survival is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. So wherever you are watching, whatever you have endured, whatever peace you are still trying to build, I hope this story reminds you of one thing: your life belongs to you. Your truth belongs to you, and your future does not have to look anything like your past. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing courage in a world that so often asks for silence. Now tell me, where are you listening from?